The heavy parchment felt like a stone in King Theron's hand. Its edges, crisp and cool, whispered of centuries of tradition and sacrifice. The scent of old ink and beeswax filled the quiet chamber, a sterile aroma that did little to calm the tremor in his fingers. He dipped the quill, its feather scratching softly against the thick paper, a sound that amplified the silence of the room. This was not merely a signature, it was a pact, a solemn vow etched in ink, binding not only him, but the very fate of Eldoria. His blue eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were shadowed with an unusual wariness. They scanned the ornate script one last time, words detailing the terms of peace with the kingdom of Viridia. He saw not just diplomatic clauses, but the faces of his people, the fields of grain, the distant borders where skirmishes had already claimed too many lives. Every line of the royal treaty scroll represented a life saved, a tear unshed, a silent prayer answered. Yet the price felt immeasurable. A king's duty was often a lonely burden, a crown of thorns worn beneath the gilded circlet. He was 37 years old, and the weight of his crown seemed to grow heavier with each passing season. Lord Alaric Thorne, the king's most trusted advisor, stood sentinel beside the massive oak desk. His presence was a steady anchor in the swirling current of Theron's thoughts. Alaric's grave expression mirrored the solemnity of the moment, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture of respectful patience. The air in the king's study was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that settles before monumental decisions. Theron imagined the distant cries of a battle, the clang of steel, the screams of the wounded. This signature, he hoped, would silence those echoes. He pressed the quill firmly, releasing a deep, almost imperceptible sigh as his name, King Theron of Eldoria, materialized on the page. The sound of the quill coming to rest in its inkwell seemed to echo with a hollow finality. Far below in the cavernous scullery of the royal palace, Elara Vance moved with the practiced rhythm of endless toil. The heat from the massive ovens pressed against her skin, making the thin fabric of her dress cling uncomfortably. Steam rose from vast copper pots, blurring the edges of the room and carrying the pungent smell of burnt grease and boiled vegetables. Her hands, rough and reddened from harsh soaps, plunged into scalding water, scrubbing at the remnants of the court's lavish breakfast. The clatter of metal, the scraping of plates, and the constant murmur of other servants filled the space, a symphony of forgotten labor. Elara was 20 years old, yet felt 100. Years of neglect had taught her to make herself small, to blend into the shadows, to be seen but never truly noticed. Her mouse-brown hair, usually pulled back in a tight, practical knot, escaped in wisps around her tired face. A small, faded scar above her left eyebrow, a relic from a childhood fall, was the only distinctive mark on a face designed for anonymity. She cleaned, she fetched, she carried, a phantom in the grand halls of Eldoria. "Did you hear about Lady Isolde?" A voice whispered from across the room, followed by a girlish giggle. It was Clara, a younger maidservant, polishing silver with an enthusiasm Elara had long lost. "They say her gown for the king's selection is spun with threads of moonlight." Another maid, Lily, chimed in, her voice bright with a vicarious excitement Elara could not share. Elara kept her head down, her focus on a stubborn stain on a silver platter. She heard the words, absorbed them, but they felt distant, like tales from a storybook. The king's selection. It was the talk of the entire palace, a feverish hum that reached even the scullery. He needed a queen, a royal bride to seal the treaty, to bring peace. Her heart did not quicken. Her blood did not stir. She only felt the dull ache in her shoulders, the familiar burn of her hands. The concept of queens, of grand ceremonies and political marriages, belonged to a different world, one she only glimpsed through dusty windows or overheard snippets of conversation. She was a shadow, her existence defined by the tasks set before her. The palace, with its opulent chambers and echoing marble halls, felt less like a home and more like an enormous, indifferent machine. Its pervasive chill, even within the scullery's heat, seemed to seep into her very bones, carrying the scent of old parchment, beeswax, and damp stone. Upstairs, in a chamber adorned with tapestries depicting ancient battles, King Theron sat opposite Lord Alaric. The royal treaty scroll now lay carefully rolled and tied with a silk ribbon on the table between them. The king's jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the ornate windows. "The ink is dry, my king," Alaric stated, his voice a low rumble. "But the alliance is not yet secured." Theron merely nodded, the exhaustion etched around his eyes, deepening. He knew this. He had known it for weeks, for months. The marriage was the final, crucial stone in the arch of peace. "The border skirmishes with Viridia have ceased for now," Alaric continued, his tone methodical. "But their patience wears thin. The lords of the northern marches demand a firm resolution. They fear another season of raids, another winter of uncertainty." The king closed his eyes briefly, picturing the vast, wild expanse of the northern marches, the stark, unforgiving land that bordered Viridia. The memory of his father, a stern but just man, fighting to protect those very lands, rose in his mind. He bore his father's legacy, and the duty to his kingdom was paramount. "A queen from their noble houses," Theron murmured, his voice rough. "A queen for peace." It was a question more than a statement, a reflection of the bitter taste in his mouth. Lord Alaris, ever the pragmatist, offered no platitudes. "It is the only path, my king. Viridia's demand is clear, a marriage between our houses to solidify the bond. Anything less would be seen as a slight, an insult that could plunge us back into open conflict." His words, though delivered with unwavering loyalty, felt like shackles to Theron. The kingdom's welfare, its survival, outweighed any personal desire, any fleeting hope for affection or true partnership. He had accepted this long ago, yet the weight of it never truly lessened. Back in the scullery, the evening had drawn in, but the work never truly ended. Elara carried a heavy basket of freshly laundered linens through the service corridors. The air grew cooler as she moved away from the heat of the kitchens, replaced by the faint, earthy smell of damp stone and the distant, richer perfume of the palace's ornamental gardens. Her bare feet knew every uneven flagstone, every creaking floorboard. She was a silent, almost invisible presence, moving through the palace's hidden veins, while above her the arteries pulsed with the life of the court. She heard the tinkling laughter of noblewomen, the deeper tones of men's voices, the rustle of silks and velvets. These sounds, usually just background noise, took on a sharper edge tonight. The king's selection was imminent. The anticipation was a tangible thing, a shimmering veil draped over every conversation. She imagined the ladies, their faces painted, their hair intricately coiled, each vying for the ultimate prize. It was a game she knew nothing about, a world closed off to her. She was simply Elara, the maidservant. Her path led her through the edge of the grand hall, a vast, echoing space usually reserved for court functions. Tonight, it was empty, save for a few servants doing a final polish. The polished marble floor reflected the dim light from the towering windows. She picked up a stray fallen petal from a vase, her fingers brushing against the cold, smooth stone. The hall was designed to inspire awe, its high arches and ornate carvings speaking of power and permanence. Elara felt only smallness within its grandeur. As she reached the far side, a sudden movement caught her eye. At the very center of the vast hall, a figure stood, bathed in the last fading light filtering through a stained glass window. It was Lady Isolde Blackwell. Alara's breath hitched in her throat, a silent, sharp gasp. Lady Isolde was a vision, her raven black hair styled in an elaborate braid, catching the light like spun midnight. Her gown, a deep emerald green, was clearly of the finest silk, shimmering with every subtle shift of her body. Lady Isolde was not merely standing, she was practicing. Her chin was held high, her back straight, her arms gracefully extended. Then with an almost imperceptible sweep of her skirt, she executed a flawless, regal bow, her head inclining just so, her eyes fixed on an imaginary throne. There was a fierce, almost predatory grace in her movements, a palpable ambition radiating from her. She was poised, elegant, and undeniably beautiful, every inch the Queen Eldoria expected. Elara froze in the shadows, clutching the basket of linens to her chest as if for protection. Her own drab, threadbare dress felt like a coarse sack against her skin. Her hands, rough from toil, seemed ugly in contrast to Lady Isolde's delicate, unblemished skin. Her hair, perpetually escaping its knot, felt wild and untamed compared to the noblewoman's perfectly sculpted coiffure. A sharp, familiar ache bloomed in her chest, a profound sense of inadequacy. She watched as Lady Isolde straightened, a faint, confident smile playing on her lips, then repeated the bow even more perfectly than before. The crushing weight of her own insignificance settled over Alara, cold and absolute, in the silent, echoing grandeur of the hall. The heavy silence of the grand hall, so often a cloak for Alara's quiet work, suddenly splintered. A frantic energy, sharp and unwelcome, sliced through the air, replacing the hushed whispers of duty with a clamor of hurried footsteps. Alara, still lost in the quiet ache of her own insignificance as she swept the polished stone, looked up, her broom pausing mid-stroke. Her gaze had just drifted from where Lady Isolde, a vision in rich silk, had perfected a regal bow, a stark reminder of Alara's own place in the palace's rigid order. Now, a different kind of disturbance seized the court. A young stable boy, his face streaked with dirt and fear, burst into the main courtyard, his breath ragged in the cold morning air. His worn tunic was torn at the shoulder, and his usually quick movements were clumsy with agitation. His voice, usually a cheerful whistle or a soft murmur to the horses, was now a strained, breathless cry that carried through the palace's open archways. He spoke of a large creature, a magnificent white wolf seen limping near the ancient stone walls, its fur matted with something dark. The boy's wide, terrified eyes sought out the guards, his hands gesturing wildly towards the distant forest line. The guards, initially dismissive, their attention typically fixed on the mundane security of the palace grounds, exchanged uneasy glances. They were men of duty, accustomed to the predictable rhythms of court life, not the sudden intrusion of wild legend. The mention of a white wolf, particularly one so close to the palace, sent a ripple of unease through their hardened ranks. Such an animal, according to the oldest tales, was no ordinary beast. It was the spirit wolf, the ancient guardian, a whisper of prophecy and a harbinger of change, rarely seen and always revered. A low murmur spread through the servants gathering in curiosity, their faces reflecting a mixture of awe and superstitious dread. Alara felt a chill trace its way down her spine. She watched the guards, their heavy armor clanking as they huddled, their voices dropping to urgent, hushed tones. The stable boy, still trembling, recounted his sighting, the creature's immense size, its coat almost glowing even in the pale morning light, and the unmistakable limp that spoke of pain and vulnerability. His words, though simple, painted a vivid image of the majestic animal brought low. A knot tightened in Alara's stomach, a strange aching sympathy stirring within her. She had always felt a quiet kinship with the wild things beyond the palace walls, a connection often stronger than any she found among people. This news, therefore, felt acutely personal. The chief guard, a burly man named Thomas, his brow furrowed in a rare display of concern, dispatched a runner immediately to inform the king. This was not a matter for simple patrol. The presence of the sacred wolf, especially in such a state, demanded royal attention. Alara, blending into the shadows of a grand archway, felt a peculiar sense of dread and anticipation. She had grown up hearing the tales of the spirit wolf, stories whispered by the older servants, tales of its wisdom, its silent judgment, and its profound connection to the fate of Eldoria. Now it was here, injured, at the very edge of their world. A cold certainty settled deep within her that this event, however strange, would not be insignificant. Meanwhile, within the king's private chambers, a different kind of burden weighed heavily upon King Theron. He sat at his massive oak desk, the royal treaty scroll spread before him, its elaborate script a testament to diplomatic necessity. The scent of old parchment and beeswax, familiar and comforting, now seemed to mock his inner turmoil. He ran a weary hand through his dark beard, his blue eyes, usually sharp and resolute, clouded with a profound weariness. The weight of his crown felt heavier than usual that morning. Lord Alaric Thorne, the king's most trusted advisor, stood respectfully to the side, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression grave. He had just delivered the latest reports from the border, grim tidings of skirmishes and growing unrest from the kingdom of Viridia. The peace treaty, secured through the delicate dance of negotiation and solidified by the promise of a royal marriage, felt more vital than ever. The kingdom's survival, its very future, rested upon this fragile agreement. Theron felt the crushing pressure of these responsibilities, a constant, nagging ache in his chest. A sharp rap on the chamber door interrupted their quiet, tense discussion. The runner, breathless and deferential, bowed deeply, his voice trembling slightly as he delivered the stable boy's report. "Your Majesty," he announced, his words echoing a faint tremor, "a white wolf, injured, has been sighted near the palace perimeter." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. King Theron's eyes, which had been fixed on the treaty, now snapped upwards, a flicker of ancestral memory stirring within their depths. He knew the legends, of course. Every monarch of Eldoria was steeped in the lore of the spirit wolf, the ancient guardian of their lands. It was a symbol of divine blessing, a spiritual guide, and sometimes a stern judge. To see it, and injured at that, was an omen indeed. His brow furrowed further, the pragmatic king clashing with the man who carried the ancient beliefs of his people. "An injured wolf?" Theron repeated, his voice low, a mix of concern and irritation. "Is it contained? Can it be moved?" He thought of the delicate political balance, the impending arrival of the noble candidates. A wild animal, sacred or not, was an unwelcome complication. The palace was not a sanctuary for beasts, however revered. Lord Alaric cleared his throat, his grave voice cutting through the king's practical concerns. "Your Majesty, this is no common wolf. The tales speak of it appearing only in times of great import. Its presence, particularly in such a state, could be seen as a sign." He chose his words carefully, knowing the king's struggle between duty and the more mystical aspects of their heritage. Alaric, though a man of tradition, understood the power of belief among the people. Theron pushed away from his desk, pacing slowly across the thick rugs, his hands clasped behind his back. The decision he faced felt increasingly complex. His rational mind urged him to secure the borders, to finalize the marriage, to ensure the prosperity of his kingdom through tangible actions. Yet, the old stories, the deep-seated reverence for the spirit wolf, tugged at a different part of his soul. He could not simply ignore it, nor could he allow it to disrupt the fragile peace he was striving to forge. The dilemma of his crown pressed heavily, a cold weight on his conscience. "Send out a small team," Theron finally commanded, his voice firm, though a subtle weariness laced his tone. "Find the creature, but approach with caution. If it is indeed the spirit wolf, we must treat it with the respect due to its station. Ensure it does not wander into the city and keep its presence discreet." He did not want widespread panic or superstitious fervor to destabilize his people further. His primary duty remained the stability of Eldoria. The sacred wolf, for now, was another problem to manage, another intricate piece on the chessboard of his reign. As the king grappled with his weighty decisions, Alara found herself drawn by an inexplicable pull. The stable boy's breathless report, the hushed fear among the servants, and the ancient stories all converged into a single, irresistible current. Her chores for the morning had been completed, her quiet presence in the bustling scullery leaving barely a ripple. But the thought of the injured white wolf, a creature of legend and pain, gnawed at her, a silent plea that resonated deep within her empathetic heart. She could not shake the image of its limping form. She knew the palace grounds intimately, every hidden nook, every forgotten pathway. Years of thankless tasks had given her an unspoken map of its hidden corners. Her mind turned to the neglected hidden healing garden, a place many believed was cursed or simply too overgrown to bother with. It was walled off, a forgotten corner, where wild roses grew riotously over ancient stone, and therapeutic herbs flourished untamed beneath a dense canopy of old oak trees. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the damp earth. The air there was always heavy with the rich scent of blooming flowers, damp soil, and the pungent aroma of medicinal plants. No one ever went there. It was the perfect place for a wounded creature to seek solace. Driven by a strange intuition and a fierce, quiet compassion, Alara slipped away from the main kitchen, her movements as silent as a shadow. She moved through the echoing marble halls, her soft, worn shoes making no sound against the polished stone. Her heart hammered a nervous rhythm against her ribs. If she were caught venturing into forbidden areas, especially a place like the Healing Garden, the consequences could be severe. Yet, the thought of the suffering animal outweighed her fear of punishment. She felt a deep, instinctive urge to help, a pull she could not deny. The garden's entrance was a heavy, ivy-covered gate, rusted on its hinges, almost swallowed by the encroaching foliage. Elara pushed it open with a soft creak, the sound barely audible over the gentle hum of insects. She stepped into a world apart, a wild haven hidden within the rigid formality of the palace. The air was cooler here, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and crushed mint. Twisted branches formed natural archways, their leaves brushing against her face as she walked deeper inside. The quiet here was profound, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustle of her own simple dress. She walked slowly, her hazel eyes scanning the dense undergrowth, her ears straining for any sound. A snapped twig, a soft whimper. She moved with the silent grace of someone who had spent a lifetime trying to be unseen. The garden unfolded around her, a tapestry of green and earthy tones broken by flashes of vibrant bloom. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, creating pockets of deep shadow. Elara felt a peculiar sense of calm here, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the palace. This place, in its forgotten wildness, felt more real, more alive. Then, she saw it. Tucked beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, half hidden by a tangle of thorny bushes, lay a creature of breathtaking beauty and profound suffering. It was indeed a wolf, larger than any she had ever imagined, its fur an ethereal white, almost glowing even in the subdued light. One of its powerful legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and a dark, sticky stain marred its pristine coat near its flank. The wolf's eyes, a startling amber, were half closed in pain, yet a deep intelligence shone within their depths. Alara's breath hitched in her throat. It was unmistakable. This was the spirit wolf, the legend made flesh, brought low by some unseen force. Her heart ached with an immediate, overwhelming wave of compassion. She saw not a fearsome beast, but a wounded soul, vulnerable and alone. All fear of being caught, all thoughts of her own insignificance, vanished in that moment. Only the raw, urgent need to help remained. She approached slowly, cautiously, her steps soft upon the mossy ground. She knew the danger of a cornered, injured wild animal, even one of legend. But something in the wolf's gaze, a profound weariness mixed with a flicker of ancient wisdom, compelled her forward. She knelt several feet away, her simple skirt pooling around her voice a barely audible whisper. "Hello," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you very hurt?" It was a foolish question, perhaps, but it was all she could think to say. The wolf's head lifted slightly, its nose twitching as it caught her scent. Its amber eyes fixed on her, piercing and ancient, seeming to see not just her form, but into the very depths of her quiet, compassionate soul. A low, soft whine escaped its throat, a sound of deep pain that twisted Alara's heart. She held her breath, unsure if it would snap or recoil. But it did neither. It simply watched her, its gaze unwavering. Slowly, carefully, Elara extended her hand, palm open, a silent offering of peace and comfort. Her fingers were grimy from her morning chores, but her intentions were pure. She did not know what else to do, but her heart urged her to connect, to soothe. The air around them seemed to shimmer, thick with a silent understanding, a profound, unspoken language passing between girl and beast. The scent of wild earth and the wolf's musky fur filled her senses, primal and real. The wolf, with a strength that belied its injury, shifted its weight, a low groan rumbling in its chest. Then, in a gesture that stole Alara's breath and brought a sudden warmth to her chest, it lowered its magnificent head. Its soft, warm muzzle, bristling with fine hairs, nudged gently against her trembling hand, a silent acknowledgement of her kindness, a profound acceptance of her presence. The touch was feather light, yet it resonated through her entire being, a deep, primal connection. A single tear escaped Alara's eye, a mix of overwhelming empathy and quiet awe. In that singular moment, Alara felt a rush of both wonder and profound dread. The sheer audacity of her act, helping a creature known only in hushed legends, a being whose very presence within the palace grounds was a secret of immense proportions, crashed over her. She knew the immense risk she had taken, the perilous secret she now held close to her heart. The world of silent chores and crushing insignificance had just shattered, replaced by a dangerous, sacred truth. The chill seeped into Alara's bones even beneath her thick, patched dress. She moved through darkened palace halls like a ghost. Her worn slippers barely disturbed the silence. Each creaking floorboard, each distant snore from a guard, jolted her with fear. Discovery meant severe punishment, but the hidden healing garden called stronger than any fear. She guarded this secret fiercely. Her small satchel held stewed meat saved from her meager dinner and a clay pot of healing balm. The palace air smelled of old stone and beeswax, a scent that had long mingled with her breath. She clutched the rough fabric of her uniform, a nervous habit. The cold night air pricked her skin. She reached the overgrown garden gate hidden behind a crumbling wall. The old iron hinges groaned softly as she pushed it open. The sound seemed too loud. A rush of damp earth and blooming night jasmine filled her lungs, a welcome change from the stale palace air. This forgotten corner was her only sanctuary. Through ancient oak trees, moonlight dappled wild roses and unruly ivy. The air hummed with unseen insects, a comforting sound against the palace's quiet. She found the wolf in its usual spot, beneath medicinal herbs. Its white fur shimmered, a beacon in her shadowed world. The wolf's glowing eyes fixed on her. They held a depth Alara could not fathom, offering a silent welcome. She knelt slowly, setting down her satchel. The earth was cool and damp. Solace settled over her as she met the wolf's gaze. She pulled out the stewed meat. The wolf lowered its head, a low purr vibrating deep within its chest. This sound of contentment and trust warmed her. She watched it eat, its powerful jaws moving gently, lapping every morsel. The sight brought a quiet joy she rarely experienced. After it finished, she uncorked the clay pot. The herbal balm made from comfrey and calendula smelled pungent and earthy. She spread it gently over the fading scars on the wolf's flank, traces of the deep gash found weeks ago. The fur beneath her fingers was thick and soft. "You are so brave," she whispered, her voice soft in the quiet night. The wolf leaned into her touch, its breath warm. "So strong. I wish I could be as strong as you." Her eyes blurred with tears. This wild, magnificent creature seemed the only one who truly saw or listened. A raw vulnerability opened within her. "No one ever looks at me," she confided, her voice barely audible. "Not truly. I am just another shadow, another pair of hands to clean and serve." The wolf nudged her arm with its head, its deep eyes unwavering. It seemed to understand every unspoken word, every ache. A bond formed, not through words, but shared silence and deep understanding. "Sometimes," she continued, a tear tracing her cheek, "I feel like I am disappearing. Like if I stopped moving, no one would notice I was gone." The thought was a raw, aching truth. The palace was cold and lonely, faces blurring into an anonymous mass. She was just background, a silent fixture in the endless halls. She remembered Lady Isolde that day, radiant and proud, practicing her regal bow. Alara felt her own insignificance, a stark contrast to nobility's grandeur. She spoke of whispered jokes, dismissive glances, the constant feeling of being less than. The weight of years of neglect settled upon her like a heavy cloak. "They talk about the king's selection," she whispered, leaning against the wolf's warm fur. "About finding a queen to secure peace. They speak of lineage and power. It all seems so grand. And then there is me, just trying to avoid spilling something, just trying to keep my head down." A small, bitter laugh escaped her lips, thin and fragile in the vast garden. The wolf purred, nudging her hand with its nose. The gesture offered comfort, a silent acknowledgement of her real pain. Alara felt a peculiar shift within her. She was communing with something ancient, a wisdom held in its luminous gaze. It mirrored her own hidden depths. The garden became her confessional, the wolf her silent confidant. Night after night, she slipped away with her small offerings and heavy heart. She spoke of her childhood, of a faded scar above her left eyebrow from a tumble no one noticed. She spoke of cold stones, empty corridors, ceaseless work that left her body aching, her spirit hollow. She described how other servants looked at her, with pity and disdain, as if her quiet nature made her strange. She never joined their gossiping, never sought camaraderie. She had learned early that kindness was rare in the palace. She built walls around her heart. The wolf, however, seemed to melt those walls with its presence. Each night the wolf's wounds healed further, its fur gleaming brighter. Its movements became more fluid, its strength visibly returning. Alara found quiet pride in its recovery, a purpose she had never known. Tending to this magnificent secret friend gave her a reason to face her endless drudgery. She carried the warmth of its fur, the memory of its gaze, always. She often sat in silence, observing the wolf, feeling the peace it brought. The rustle of leaves, an owl's distant cry, the wolf's steady breathing filled her world in those precious hours. The air, thick with night-blooming flowers and damp earth, became a soothing balm. One evening as she stroked its powerful head, the wolf gave a soft lick against her hand. The profound, unexpected affection brought fresh tears to her eyes. A bond formed between them, woven from trust, empathy, and shared solitude. She was no longer alone. She wondered what this majestic creature saw in her. Why had it allowed a simple maidservant to approach, to tend its wounds, to pour out her heart? Its eyes, deep pools of golden light, held ancient knowledge, a silent understanding beyond human wisdom. She felt in the presence of something sacred, imbued with the land's spirit. The wolf often lay with its head resting on her lap, its weight a comforting anchor. She wove her fingers through its thick fur, marveling at its softness, feeling its rhythmic heartbeat against her leg. In those moments, the palace's cold, rigid world faded. There was only the garden, the moon, and their profound, unspoken language. She spoke of small joys, a sunset from a high window, warm bread, a servant's fleeting kindness. She also spoke of her quiet longing for something more, for a life where she was not just an invisible hand, but a person known and valued. These thoughts she had never dared to voice, even to herself, for fear of crushing disappointment. The wolf would shift, sometimes sighing as if echoing her weariness. It nudged her hand, a soft reminder of its presence, a silent reassurance. Their connection was a tapestry of vulnerability and solace. It was a secret world, hidden from the court's judging eyes, a world where Alara found acceptance. She knew the risk was immense. If anyone discovered her secret, harboring the sacred injured wolf, the consequences would be dire. The king himself had declared the wolf a creature of omen, yet she could not stop. The peace she found, the solace in the wolf's companionship, was too precious. It was the only warmth in her otherwise cold existence. One night, as the moon climbed high, casting long shadows, Alara felt a strange tremor. The peacefully resting wolf suddenly lifted its head, ears twitching. Its glowing eyes, usually calm, held an unsettling depth, a flicker of ancient knowing. It seemed to peer into a future she could not see. Alara shivered. A peculiar unease settled over her. The wolf's gaze held power, as if it understood her destiny more than she did. Just then the distinct, heavy thud of patrolling guards' boots echoed faintly beyond the garden wall, drawing closer with her racing heart. The air within the royal palace had shifted, thick with the scent of beeswax and polished wood, but now laced with something sharper, an almost metallic tang of anticipation. Every corner hummed with a nervous energy, a constant flutter of activity that made the ancient stones themselves seem to vibrate. Servants scurried with renewed urgency, their whispers hushed but quick, carrying fragments of excited gossip through the echoing halls. Alara moved among them, a shadow among shadows, her hands raw from scrubbing floors that would soon reflect the grandeur of Eldoria's noblest families. Each stroke of her brush, each splash of soapy water, seemed to amplify the vast distance between her own simple world and the dazzling spectacle preparing to unfold. She swept dust from the grand staircase, her gaze tracing the intricate patterns of the tapestries being unfurled from the high ceilings. These weren't the usual faded hangings. These were vibrant, depicting ancient battles and the proud lineage of kings, each thread a testament to a history she merely served. A sense of profound isolation settled over her, heavy and familiar, like a well-worn cloak. She wondered if the dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight felt as insignificant as she did, caught in a swirling current beyond their control. Her heart thrummed a quiet, mournful rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the palace's burgeoning excitement. The kitchens, usually a cacophony of clattering pots and boisterous shouts, now operated with an almost reverent hush. Chefs barked orders in low tones, their faces glistening with sweat as they orchestrated feasts fit for a king and his soon-to-be chosen queen. The aroma of roasting meats, sweet pastries, and exotic spices mingled in the air, a rich tapestry of scents that spoke of abundance and celebration. Elara carried trays of fresh linens past the bustling pantries, catching glimpses of silver platters being meticulously arranged, each one gleaming under the soft glow of oil lamps. She imagined the laughter, the clinking glasses, the joyous declarations that would soon fill these spaces, a stark contrast to the quiet companionship she found in the forgotten garden. A sudden burst of light from a nearby corridor caught her eye. Lady Isolde Blackwell emerged, her raven hair shimmering under the crystal chandeliers, arranged in an elaborate cascade of braids interwoven with pearls. Her gown, a deep emerald green, flowed around her like liquid silk, each movement a deliberate act of grace. The fabric whispered against the marble floor, a soft, confident sigh. Alara felt her breath catch in her throat, a familiar pang of inadequacy tightening her chest. Isolde's beauty was undeniable, a sharp, elegant perfection that seemed to demand attention, to fill every space she entered. As Isolde passed, a faint scent of jasmine and rose lingered in her wake, a luxurious perfume that seemed to mock the humble smell of lye soap on Alara's hands. Alara quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks burning with an unfamiliar shame, though she knew Isolde had not even seen her. To the lady, Alara was merely another part of the background, an extension of the stone and mortar. She clutched the laundry basket tighter, her knuckles white, and tried to shrink further into the shadows, a silent prayer forming on her lips for the day to simply end. King Theron, meanwhile, observed the preparations from the high arch of his private study, the heavy oak door slightly ajar. The sounds of the palace reached him as a muted roar, a distant thrum of countless lives intertwined with his own. He watched as a final enormous banner bearing the Eldorian crest was hoisted, its crimson and gold shimmering against the pale stone. His gaze was distant, his jaw set in a rigid line that spoke of burdens rather than anticipation. The weight of the royal treaty scroll, sealed and waiting for its final personal ratification, pressed down upon him like a physical entity. His chambers, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, now felt infused with the external pressure. Scrolls lay stacked on his desk, maps of the borderlands spread out, each line a potential scar on his kingdom. The smell of aged parchment and cool stone offered little comfort, mixing with the fainter, more insistent perfumes drifting up from the lower levels. He longed for the simple clarity of a soldier's duty, the straightforward command of a battle, rather than the intricate, often unsatisfying dance of diplomacy. His heart felt like a stone in his chest, heavy and unyielding. He saw Lady Isolde, not through the study door, but in his mind's eye. Her image, cultivated and presented by his advisors, was one of impeccable breeding and strategic alliance. She represented stability, a bulwark against the encroaching threats from Viridia. He knew she was beautiful, intelligent, and poised, everything a queen should be in the eyes of his court and his allies. Yet when he thought of her, his thoughts were not of warmth or companionship, but of cold calculation, of a duty to be fulfilled, a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of Eldoria. Lord Alaric, his trusted advisor, entered the study with a stack of ceremonial documents, his expression grave but resolute. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice a low, steady tone. "The arrangements are complete." The Viridian envoys expressed their utmost satisfaction with Lady Isolde. Her bearing, her grace, they speak highly of her. Theron merely nodded, turning his gaze back to the window, watching a solitary raven circle high above the palace spires. "And Lady Isolde herself, Alaric?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended, a slight tremor underlying the words. "Does she share their Enthusiasm. Alaric paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his shrewd eyes. Lady Isolde understands her duty, Your Majesty. She approaches this union with the solemnity and dedication befitting a future queen of Eldoria. His words were carefully chosen, professional, leaving no room for personal sentiment. The heavy rustle of the parchment in his hand seemed to underscore the formality of his response. Theron let out a slow breath, a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire kingdom. He understood duty. He breathed it, lived it, was defined by it. But sometimes, in the quiet solitude of his nights, he questioned its quantum. The idea of a life laid out, preordained by treaties and political necessity, left a hollow ache in a place he rarely acknowledged. He felt the cold touch of the stone window frame against his fingers, a silent echo of the chill that sometimes permeated his soul. Downstairs, the grand hall itself had been transformed. Fresh garlands of winter jasmine and evergreen boughs adorned every pillar, their sweet, heady fragrance attempting to mask the ancient, earthy smell of the stone. Velvet drapes, newly cleaned and pressed, hung in sumptuous folds, catching the light from hundreds of newly lit candles. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets along the walls. Alara, tasked with ensuring the silver gleamed on the long banquet tables, felt her eyes sting from the smoke and the relentless polishing. She listened to the conversation swirling around her, snippets of admiration for Lady Isolde's lineage, her family's wealth, her strategic connections. A perfect match for the king, one scullery maid murmured, her voice filled with awe. She will bring such strength to the throne. Another agreed, and beauty. The king deserves beauty beside him. Alara's fingers tightened around the polishing cloth, a dull ache starting behind her eyes. She pictured the wolf in the garden, its soft fur, its knowing eyes, a stark contrast to the glittering, superficial discussions here. She remembered the way the wolf had leaned into her touch, a silent declaration of trust. It was a warmth she had never known from any human in the palace. Here, surrounded by opulence and expectation, she felt only the cold, impersonal grandeur. The rough texture of her servant's tunic felt like a second skin, a permanent label that marked her as invisible, inconsequential. She longed for the damp earth of the hidden garden, the quiet rustle of leaves, the scent of wild herbs. That small, forgotten corner of the palace felt more real, more alive than these polished, echoing halls. Later that afternoon, as the first distinguished guests began to arrive, Alara was assigned to the servants' quarter that overlooked the main receiving hall. Her task was to ensure no stray dust marred the polished floorboards, her eyes cast down, her movements practiced and unobtrusive. But even through the steady rhythm of her work, she could not ignore the spectacle unfolding below. Noble families, adorned in their finest silks and jewels, made their grand entrance, their voices a polite murmur that occasionally swelled into genuine laughter. The air grew thick with perfume and the subtle, metallic sheen of wealth. Lady Isolde made her second grand appearance of the day, descending the main staircase with an almost ethereal grace. This time her gown was a rich sapphire blue, embroidered with silver threads that glittered like starlight. Her posture was impeccable, her chin held high, her smile a dazzling, confident curve. She paused at the foot of the stairs, allowing the assembled courtiers a full view, a silent acknowledgement of their admiration. Her eyes, sharp and green, swept across the crowd, settling for a moment on King Theron, who stood formally by the dais, his expression still unreadable, burdened. From her discreet vantage point among the other servants, huddled against the wall, Alara watched. She saw the way Isolde's hand gently touched the king's arm as he greeted her, a gesture of familiarity that spoke of an already established connection, a future already charted. She saw the subtle nod of approval from Lord Alaric, his usually stern face softened by a flicker of satisfaction. The entire scene was a tableau of power, expectation, and an inevitability that pressed down on Alara's spirit. Isolde turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping past Alara's hidden corner. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. It was less a meeting and more a dismissal, a quick, almost imperceptible glance from a queen to a nobody. But in that instant, Alara saw it, a triumphant smirk, quick and fleeting, playing on Lady Isolde's perfect lips. It was a smile of absolute certainty, a victory already claimed. A familiar pang of sorrow and resignation twisted in Alara's gut, cold and sharp. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that the path ahead was clear, and she was not on it. The palace had surrendered to a feverish hum, a constant thrumming beneath its ancient stones. Every servant moved with a heightened urgency, their footsteps quickening on the polished floors, their whispers carrying a new palpable tension. The scent of freshly cut flowers, mixed with the sharp aroma of cleaning solutions and the lingering perfume of expensive silks, hung heavy in the air. Alara, her hands perpetually stained from daily chores, felt this shift in the palace's very heartbeat. It beat with an insistent rhythm, driving towards a moment that would decide the fate of the realm, a moment in which she held no part. Her task of dusting the ornate banisters overlooking the grand hall provided a sweeping, unwelcome panorama of the preparations. Yards of crimson velvet, woven with gold thread, now draped the high walls, obscuring the usual damp gray of the stone. Each new adornment, each gleaming candelabra, felt like a fresh layer of separation between her and the world that was being so meticulously crafted. She ran her fingers over the smooth, cool wood, her mind tracing the lines of the wolf's fur, a secret warmth in a world growing increasingly cold. The memory of its gentle nuzzle was a stark contrast to the stiff formality surrounding her. She overheard the eager chatter of the senior maids, their voices hushed but excitedly speculating about the king's choice. Lady Isolde, of course, one whispered, adjusting a heavy tapestry. Who else possesses such grace, such impeccable lineage? The other nodded fervently. In such beauty, she is like a goddess descended. Alara swallowed, a dry, bitter taste coating her tongue. She thought of her own reflection, glimpsed in a bucket of murky water, her hair unbound, her face smudged with soot. The comparison was absurd, painful. A flurry of activity announced the arrival of new shipments. Boxes of rare spices, casks of fine wine, and rolls of imported fabric were carted through the servant passages. The kitchens, usually a place of chaotic yet comforting noise, now vibrated with a disciplined intensity. Chefs, their faces grim with concentration, barked orders in low tones, their movements precise as they prepared an extravagant feast. Ilara carried baskets of fresh bread through the bustling corridors, the warm, yeasty scent a momentary comfort before the more aggressive perfumes of the passing nobles reclaimed her senses. She saw Lady Isolde then, descending a less-used staircase from the private chambers, flanked by two ladies-in-waiting. Isolde wore a gown of deep violet, embroidered with intricate silver patterns that seemed to catch every available light. Her posture was regal, her chin held high, and her dark hair, styled in an elaborate crown of braids, seemed to shimmer with an inner light. A subtle, confident smile played on her lips, a silent declaration of her assured position. Alara quickly lowered her gaze, pretending to scrutinize a loose thread on her worn apron. She felt her cheeks flush with an unfamiliar prickle of shame, a heat that spread through her chest. The air around Isolde crackled with an almost tangible aura of power and expectation. Her voice, when she spoke to her companions, was clear and melodious, though Alara could not discern the words. It was the sound of someone accustomed to being heard, to having every utterance treated with deference. Alara clutched the breadbasket tighter, her knuckles white, feeling the rough texture of the wicker against her skin. She longed for the quiet solitude of the hidden garden, for the reassuring presence of the wolf, a silent, powerful guardian against the harsh glare of the palace. King Theron, in the solitude of his private study, felt the palace's intensified energy like a physical weight pressing down on his shoulders. He stood by the tall, arched window, gazing out at the darkening sky, the last vestiges of twilight painting the clouds in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. The royal treaty scroll, a heavy parchment sealed with the crests of 2 kingdoms, lay open on his desk, its words a stark reminder of his inescapable duty. He reached out, touching the cold, smooth stone of the window frame, seeking a grounding sensation. His mind replayed conversations with Lord Alaric, each word a hammer blow of responsibility. "The alliance is paramount, Your Majesty," Alaric had stated earlier that day, his voice grave. "Eldoria's future hinges upon this union. Lady Isolde represents stability, strength, a true partner in governance. Theron knew this to be true, intellectually. He understood the strategic value, the necessity of a political marriage to secure peace and prevent further bloodshed. Yet a deep-seated weariness settled in his bones, a profound sense of loss for a choice he had never truly possessed. He saw Lady Isolde through the lens of duty. Her beauty was undeniable, her intelligence sharp, her family standing unassailable. She was everything his advisors presented, everything his kingdom required. But when he thought of her, his thoughts were devoid of personal warmth or genuine connection. He saw a queen, a symbol, a vital piece in the complex puzzle of statecraft. His heart, usually so guarded, felt like a hollow chamber, echoing with the unspoken sacrifices of his crown. The subtle scent of the palace, always a mix of old stone and beeswax, now seemed to carry a faint cloying sweetness from the fresh flowers, a reminder of the impending ceremony. He ran a hand across his beard, feeling the rough texture of the dark hair, a familiar sensation that anchored him. He wished for a moment of quiet, a brief reprieve from the relentless demands of his title. The prospect of the coming ceremony, the public declaration, the binding of his fate to another's for the sake of his people, loomed large and oppressive. His breath hitched in his throat, a silent, unseen struggle against the forces that shaped his life. He was a king, yes, but also a man, bound by an iron grip to a path not entirely his own. The grand throne room, the heart of the palace, had undergone the most dramatic transformation. Every surface gleamed, reflecting the light of hundreds of candles and massive chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of burning beeswax, sweet floral arrangements, and the expensive perfumes of the arriving nobility. Elara, now assigned to replenish the water carafes in the antechamber, moved quietly through the periphery, a ghost in her drab servant's tunic. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. She watched as groups of lords and ladies, their voices a polite murmur, drifted past, their eyes alight with curiosity and expectation. Each noblewoman was a vision of elaborate gowns and sparkling jewels, their laughter light and airy. Elara felt a pang of longing, not for the finery itself, but for the effortless confidence these women exuded, the certainty of their place in the world. She thought of her own hidden place, the quiet sanctuary with the wolf, a secret world so utterly different from this glittering spectacle. A sudden hush fell over the antechamber as Lady Isolde appeared, ready to make her formal entrance into the throne room. This time, her gown was a shimmering gold, a cascade of fabric that seemed to catch and amplify the light, making her appear almost ethereal. Diamonds sparkled in her hair, at her throat, and on her slender wrists. Her emerald eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the faces of the assembled nobles, a confident, almost regal acknowledgement of their presence. She exuded an undeniable aura of power, a magnetic pull that drew every gaze. King Theron stood by the entrance to the throne room, a tall, imposing figure in his royal robes. His expression remained distant, a carefully constructed mask of kingly composure. He offered Lady Isolde a polite, almost formal nod as she approached, her smile radiant, full of an unspoken understanding. The subtle shift in the atmosphere, the collective intake of breath from the assembled courtiers, was almost audible. It was the moment everyone had anticipated, the confirmation of a future already foretold. From her hidden vantage point among the other servants, pressed against the cold stone wall, Elara witnessed Lady Isolde's triumphant smirk. It was a quick, fleeting curve of her lips, directed not at the king but at the General Assembly, a silent declaration of victory. It was a look of absolute, unassailable confidence, a certainty that her destiny was now secured. A familiar pang of sorrow and resignation twisted in Elara's gut, a bitter taste rising in her throat. The weight of her own insignificance, her invisible existence, pressed down on her with renewed force, leaving her breathless. The immense hall of the grand throne room shimmered under the light of 1,000 candles. Their flickering flames danced across intricate tapestries depicting ancient battles and the proud lineage of Eldoria's kings. Gold thread, woven into the heavy fabric, caught the light, creating a dazzling display of wealth and power. Marble pillars, cold and smooth to the touch, stretched toward a vaulted ceiling where painted gods and goddesses looked down with stern, unblinking eyes. Every surface gleamed, polished to a mirror finish, reflecting the nervous excitement that thrummed through the gathered nobles. Alara stood near the back, pressed against a cold stone wall, a small, forgotten shadow among the vibrant silks and rustling brocades. Her drab gown felt like a coarse sack against her skin, and the scent of expensive perfumes mingled with the earthy aroma of old stone and beeswax made her feel dizzy. She could hear the low hum of conversation, a restless tide of anticipation that swelled and receded, punctuated by polite coughs and the occasional sharp, tinkling laugh. Her hands were clasped tightly before her knuckles white, a familiar knot of unease tightening in her stomach. This grand spectacle was not for her, yet she was bound to witness it, a silent observer of a fate that felt utterly separate from her own. King Theron entered, his heavy footsteps echoing through the hushed chamber. He moved with a practiced dignity, his shoulders broad under the weight of his royal mantle. His deep blue eyes, usually sharp and discerning, seemed shadowed with a profound wariness today. He acknowledged the respectful bows and curtsies with a slight nod, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces, though he appeared to see little. Every step he took brought him closer to the great oak throne, a formidable seat carved with the symbols of his house. The very air around him felt heavy with the unspoken expectations of his court and, indeed, two kingdoms. He could feel the weight of the treaty scroll, unseen but ever present, pressing against his very soul. Lord Alaric Thorne, the king's most trusted advisor, stepped forward once Theron was seated. His voice, grave and resonant, cut through the residual murmurs. "Noble lords and ladies," he began, his words clear and measured, "foreign dignitaries, and esteemed members of Eldoria's court." He held up a hand, and a profound silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the candles. "We stand at a pivotal moment for our beloved kingdom." Alara watched Alaric, his gray beard meticulously trimmed, his eyes shrewd even from this distance. She knew his words were always carefully chosen, each syllable weighted with meaning. He spoke of the long-standing tensions with the neighboring kingdom of Viridia, of the border skirmishes that had claimed too many lives, of the fragile peace that now hung by a single, silken thread. He spoke of the royal treaty scroll, a document of immense importance, its terms demanding a union between Eldoria's king and a noble daughter of Viridia. "This union," Alaric declared, his voice gaining a solemn intensity, "is not merely a matter of heart, but of state. It is the bedrock upon which a lasting peace will be built, safeguarding our people from further conflict and ensuring the prosperity of generations to come." He gestured towards the row of noble candidates, their faces a carefully composed blend of modesty and ambition. Lady Isolde Blackwell stood among them, her raven hair a dark cascade against her pale skin, her green eyes fixed upon the king with an almost possessive intensity. A faint, knowing smile played upon her lips, a silent promise of her impending triumph. Alara felt a cold dread creep into her bones. She remembered Lady Isolde's confident smirk from before, the absolute certainty in her bearing. It was clear to everyone who the favored candidate was, who had been groomed for this role. The political machine of the palace had already chosen, and this ceremony was merely a formality, a grand unveiling. A bitter taste filled Alara's mouth, a mixture of helplessness and a strange, quiet defiance. She thought of the hidden healing garden, the quiet moments with the injured wolf, the unspoken understanding that had blossomed between them. That world felt a million miles away from this cold, calculating display of power. King Theron listened to Alaric's impassioned speech, each word a hammer blow against his own quiet reservations. He knew the truth of what Alaric said. The kingdom needed this alliance. His people needed peace. He had spent countless nights poring over maps, debating strategies, sacrificing his own desires for the good of Eldoria. His gaze drifted over the noble women presented before him. They were beautiful, accomplished, each a fine match in her own right. But none stirred his heart. None promised the warmth he secretly longed for. He saw only the political implications, the carefully negotiated terms, the endless responsibilities that would come with any of them. He caught sight of Lady Isolde, her posture impeccable, her eyes meeting his with an unwavering confidence that bordered on arrogance. She was everything a queen was expected to be: regal, intelligent, politically astute. She would bring stability, alliances, and a formidable presence to his court. He knew this. His mind had made its choice long ago, driven by duty and logic. Yet a hollow ache persisted in his chest, a yearning for something more, something genuine, something that felt less like a transaction and more like a true partnership. He pushed the feeling down, as he always did, deep into the recesses of his weary soul. Kings did not have the luxury of such sentiments. The silence that followed Alaric's presentation was absolute, pregnant with anticipation. All eyes turned to King Theron, waiting for his decision. He felt the collective breath of the court, held captive by this moment. The weight of his crown seemed to press even harder, a physical burden. He inhaled slowly, the air heavy with the scent of old parchment and the faint metallic tang of the throne's cold metal accents. His fingers, calloused from years of gripping sword hilts and quill pens, tightened slightly on the arms of the throne. This was it, the moment of truth, the moment he would seal the fate of his kingdom and his own. He looked at the faces before him, seeing not individuals, but the expectations they represented. The foreign dignitaries leaned forward, their expressions unreadable but expectant. His own advisors, including Alaric, watched him with unwavering loyalty, their faces urging him to fulfill his duty. He saw the hopeful, nervous glances of the other candidates and the triumphant, almost smug look on Lady Isolde's face. He imagined the headlines in the court gazettes, the celebrations across the kingdom, the sigh of relief that would ripple through the land. Alara felt her breath catch in her throat. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a wild drumbeat in the quiet hall. She didn't know why. She was merely a servant, an afterthought in this grand scheme. But a strange, prickling sensation ran down her spine, a tremor of intuition that something was not quite right, that this carefully constructed edifice was far more fragile than it appeared. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, and in the darkness, she saw the glowing eyes of the spirit wolf, felt the gentle nudge of its nose against her palm. A warmth spread through her, a stark contrast to the cold formality of the throne room. King Theron straightened his posture, gathering his resolve. He opened his mouth, the words of his decision already forming on his tongue, practiced and precise. The name of his chosen queen, a name that would echo through the history of Eldoria, was about to be spoken. He envisioned the cheers, the applause, the respectful bows. He imagined the burden lifting, the path ahead clearly defined, however loveless it might be. This was his duty. This was his sacrifice. But then an impossible sound shattered the oppressive silence, a sound that tore through the ancient stone walls, vibrated through the very floor beneath their feet, and echoed into the deepest corners of the sprawling palace. It was not a human cry, nor the clang of armor, nor the blast of a trumpet. It was a howl, raw and ancient, chilling and resonant, filled with an otherworldly power that silenced every breath, froze every movement, and brought the grand spectacle of the court to an immediate, terrifying halt. The howl had torn through the air, a primeval sound that struck something deep within the bones of every person in the grand throne room. It was a raw, ancient cry, a sound from the wild, unlike anything that had ever echoed within these polished walls. It ripped away all the carefully constructed silence, shattering the polite murmurs and the soft rustle of expensive fabrics, leaving a raw, aching void in its wake. King Theron, his mouth still slightly agape from a half-spoken command, felt the echoes vibrate through the very stones of the dais beneath his feet, a tremor that ran up his spine and settled in his jaw. His gilded throne felt suddenly cold beneath him. Lord Alaric, usually so composed, stood rigid, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of a ceremonial dagger he did not carry, his palms slick with a sudden cold sweat. Lady Isolde, moments before poised for triumph, her emerald eyes bright with ambition, now looked as though she had seen a ghost, her elaborate coiffure seeming to tremble with her fear, a stray pearl coming loose to glint against her pale cheek. The scent of her expensive perfume, moments ago cloying, now seemed to curdle with the rising fear. Then, from the grand double doors that had inexplicably swung open, revealing only a deeper, unfathomable darkness beyond, a figure emerged. It was not a guard, not a noble, not any human being. It was the spirit wolf, magnificent and fully recovered, its fur shimmering with an unearthly white glow that seemed to absorb the opulent light from the chandeliers, casting long, wavering shadows across the marble floor. It strode into the room with a silent, deliberate grace, each massive paw placing itself with an ancient certainty, making no sound upon the polished stone. The sheer scale of it, larger than any wolf they had ever seen, its presence both terrifying and breathtaking, commanded an immediate, absolute silence that was far more profound than any command from the king. A faint, wild scent of pine and damp earth, alien to the perfumed air of the palace, drifted in with it. A collective gasp, soft and involuntary, rippled through the hundreds of people gathered. It was a single, sharp intake of breath, then nothing. Some nobles, their faces bleached of color, pressed back against the tapestried walls, their silk gowns rustling like dried leaves in a sudden, unseen wind, the sound like a brittle whisper. Others clutched at their chests, their breath caught in their throats, their knuckles white against rich fabrics. A nervous tremor spread through the court, a primal fear awakening beneath the layers of etiquette and political ambition. A few dropped goblets clattered, the ringing sound impossibly loud in the overwhelming quiet. Whispers, thin and reedy, began to rise, struggling to pierce the wolf's powerful, suffocating aura like fragile moths against a storm. "It is an omen," a wizened elder from the western provinces murmured, his eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and dread. His face, usually placid, was a map of sudden alarm. His voice was barely a breath, a dry rustle in his throat, yet it carried in the stark, profound quiet that had descended. "A curse upon our house," a younger, superstitious lord hissed back, his voice tight with panic, pulling his two small children closer to his side, their faces buried in his cloak. His hand, cold and trembling, gripped their shoulders. The air grew heavy, thick with the sharp scent of fear and something ancient, something wild and untamed that had just walked into their perfectly ordered world, shattering its fragile veneer. A sudden, inexplicable chill permeated the vast chamber. The spirit wolf did not pause, did not falter in its slow, powerful stride. Its luminous eyes, pools of glowing blue light, swept across the assembled faces, seeming to pierce through skin and bone. It ignored King Theron on his throne, bypassing the powerful monarch as though he were merely another fixture in the grand hall, a piece of ornate furniture. A flicker of indignation crossed the king's face, a sudden, unfamiliar feeling of being diminished. It paid no mind to Lady Isolde, whose carefully constructed poise had completely dissolved into an expression of indignant terror, her lips trembling, her gaze fixed on the creature with a desperate, wide-eyed fear. The noble candidates who had preened and postured for weeks, their embroidered tunics and jewels sparkling, suddenly seemed small and insignificant under that unnerving gaze, their confident smiles replaced by slack-jawed awe. The wolf's head turned slowly, with an almost deliberate grace, its powerful neck muscles rippling beneath its pristine fur, catching the light in shifting patterns. Its focus was not on the center of power, nor on the faces of ambition. It seemed to search for something else, something hidden among the shadows and the less significant corners of the room. The silence deepened, broken only by the frantic beat of Alara's own heart, a drum thumping against her ribs, echoing in her ears. She was among the cluster of servants near a side archway, trying to make herself as small as possible, fading into the drabness of her tunic, praying for the cool gray stone wall behind her to swallow her whole. The dust motes danced in the slivers of light, oblivious to the terror unfolding. Her hands, clammy with a cold sweat, gripped the rough fabric of her skirt, twisting it tightly, her knuckles aching. She knew that gaze, that intelligent, ancient light in its eyes, a light that held both wisdom and fierce loyalty. She had seen it in the quiet solitude of the hidden healing garden, when she had cleaned its wounds and shared her meager rations, the warmth of its thick fur under her fingers. A wave of profound, sickening dread washed over her, chilling her from the inside out. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this creature had not come for the king, nor for his chosen bride. It had come for something else entirely, and that something, she realized with a sickening lurch, was her. The wolf's gaze continued its slow, methodical sweep, passing over rows of trembling lords and ladies, over the foreign dignitaries who sat frozen in their seats, their facey, unreadable masks of fear and confusion. Each movement of its head felt like a deliberate act, a judgment weighing every soul present. The air in the vast chamber crackled with an unspoken tension, an energy that pressed down on Alara, making it hard to breathe, her lungs feeling too tight. She wished she could simply disappear, become invisible, melt into the gray stone wall behind her, become one with the ancient, cold masonry. She could feel the rough, uneven surface of the stone against her back, an anchor that offered no comfort. Her mind raced, a chaotic swirl of fear and disbelief. This was impossible. This magnificent, terrifying creature, here in the grand throne room, the very heart of the palace's power and pomp. And she, Alara, the insignificant servant, clad in worn linen, was here too, a tiny, trembling cow in a machine that was now grinding to a halt, threatened by the wild. The knowledge of her secret, of the clandestine days she had spent tending to this very wolf, felt like a burning brand on her skin, a secret about to be exposed with devastating, irreversible consequences. The heat spread from her chest, up her throat, to her temples. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, a cold, slow journey, clinging to her mousy brown hair. She squeezed her eyes shut for a fleeting moment, a desperate, futile wish for this to be a terrible dream, a nightmare from which she would wake in her narrow cot. When she opened them again, the glowing blue eyes were no longer sweeping. They had stopped. They were fixed, with an unnerving, absolute intensity, directly on her. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving a cold, hollow ache in her chest, a sudden lightheadedness. Her fingers locked around the worn fabric of her apron, twisting it into a tight knot, a desperate anchor in a world that had just tilted violently on its axis. She tried to shrink back further into the shadows, to become one with the stone and the dust, but the wolf's unwavering gaze held her fast, a magnetic, unbreakable pull. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate bird trapped in a cage too small for its fear, threatening to burst free. The silence that followed the spirit wolf's entrance was not empty. It vibrated with 1,000 unspoken questions. The air, already thick with the scent of old wood and nervous anticipation, now carried a faint, wild musk, an essence alien to the polished palace halls. Alara, pressed against the rough stone of the wall, felt her breath catch in her throat. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her chest, echoing the rhythm of her fear. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, wishing for the earth to swallow her whole, to erase her from this terrifying spectacle. When she opened them again, the wolf had begun to move. It did not rush, nor did it hesitate. Its luminous white form glided across the polished marble floor, each paw placement silent and precise. The golden light from the towering stained glass windows seemed to coalesce around its magnificent frame, making it appear almost angelic, yet profoundly wild. Every eye in the grand throne room was fixed upon it, a collective breath held captive by its unspoken purpose. The wolf approached the first line of noble candidates, their elaborate gowns rustling as they instinctively shifted, a nervous energy rippling through their ranks. Lady Isolde stood tall among them, her raven hair a dark crown against her pale, composed face. She watched the wolf with a mixture of apprehension and disdain, her chin lifted slightly, as if daring the creature to challenge her superiority. The wolf, however, seemed entirely unimpressed by such displays of human grandeur. It moved with an almost deliberate slowness, its head held low, its glowing eyes sweeping over each noble in turn. There was an intelligence in those eyes, a depth that seemed to pierce through the carefully constructed facades of wealth and lineage. As it neared the first candidate, a young woman named Lady Beatrice, known for her delicate beauty and vast estates, the wolf paused. It lowered its head further, its nostrils flaring slightly, taking in her scent. Lady Beatrice, her face now pale as parchment, clutched the folds of her silken gown, her composure threatening to shatter. A collective sigh of tension escaped the onlookers. Then, without a sound, the spirit wolf emitted a soft, almost imperceptible huff. It did not snarl, nor did it show aggression. Instead, it simply turned its noble head away, a gesture of profound disinterest, and continued its slow, stately progress. The silence that followed this quiet dismissal was even more potent than the initial shock. Lady Beatrice, her cheeks now burning with humiliation, looked as though she might faint. Her carefully rehearsed poise had crumbled under the weight of the wolf's casual rejection. The very air seemed to thicken with embarrassment. Alara watched from her distant corner, a prickle of confused pity mixed with her overwhelming fear. She had always imagined the spirit wolf to be a fearsome beast, a symbol of raw power. This quiet, almost dismissive judgment of Barwin was far more unsettling. The wolf continued its inspection, moving along the line of expectant noblewomen. Each one, arrayed in their finest jewels and silks, held their breath as the magnificent creature approached. Each one tried to meet its gaze with a show of courage or a tentative, reassuring smile, and each one met with the same profound indifference. The wolf would stop, inhale briefly, its intelligent eyes seeming to take the full measure of the person before it, and then, with that same subtle huff and a turn of its head, it would move on. There was no aggression, no overt sign of disapproval, just an absolute lack of recognition. It was as if these women, so central to the palace's grand political scheme, simply did not register in the wolf's ancient estimation. King Theron, still rooted to his throne, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. This was not the ancient omen of blessing he had anticipated. This was a disruption, a direct challenge to the very fabric of his carefully constructed reality. His jaw tightened, a muscle throbbing beneath his neatly trimmed beard. Lord Alaric, standing stiffly beside the king, adjusted his spectacles, his shrewd eyes darting between the wolf and the increasingly flustered candidates. This deviation from expectation was unheard of in the annals of Eldorian lore. The sacred beast was meant to confirm, to bless, not to dismiss with such silent, chilling contempt. When the spirit wolf finally reached with Lady Isolde, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. She was, after all, the most prominent candidate, the one whose alliance was paramount for the treaty. Her emerald eyes, usually sparkling with confidence, now held a flicker of uncertainty. She had prepared for every scenario, a gracious bow, a respectful acknowledgement, even a subtle flirtation. She had not prepared for this. The wolf stopped directly before her, its head now tilted slightly, its glowing eyes fixed upon her. Lady Isolde, despite her outward bravery, felt a shiver trace down her spine. The wolf's gaze was unsettling, penetrating, as if it saw not just her elegant gown and noble bearing, but the very depths of her ambition, her calculating heart. She tried to maintain her composed expression, but her fingers locked around the heavy pendant at her throat. The silence stretched, becoming a suffocating weight. Then a low, guttural growl rumbled deep within the wolf's chest. It was not a roar of aggression, but a sound of profound disapproval, a warning, a dismissal that echoed through the vast hall. Lady Isolde gasped, a small, involuntary sound of shock and outrage. Her carefully constructed facade shattered. Her face, usually so serene, flushed a vivid crimson, staining her pale cheeks with anger and mortification. She recoiled a step, her elegant posture momentarily collapsing. How dare this creature, this wild beast, reject her? The humiliation was unbearable, a searing brand against her pride. Her intelligent green eyes narrowed, filled with a sudden venomous hatred for the magnificent white animal. She was Lady Isolde Blackwell, destined to be queen, and this beast had dared to challenge her. A collective gasp rippled through the court. The growl had been undeniable, the rejection absolute. Whispers erupted, a torrent of shocked murmurs that quickly swelled to a confused cacophony. "What does it mean?" one noblewoman hissed to another, her voice trembling. "It refused them all," a lord muttered, disbelief plain on his face. The rigid formality of the grand throne room began to fray, replaced by a bewildered confusion that bordered on panic. No one had ever witnessed such an event. The ancient legends spoke of the spirit wolf choosing the worthy, but never of it so openly, so completely, rejecting the kingdom's finest. King Theron pushed himself to his feet, his imposing figure a stark silhouette against the light. His voice, usually so steady and authoritative, was strained when he finally spoke. "Silence," he commanded, the single word echoing with a desperate plea for order. The murmuring died down, but the air remained thick with agitated uncertainty. His eyes, usually weary but clear, were now clouded with a desperate attempt to understand. The peace treaty, the future of his kingdom, all hinged on this selection. And now the divine intervention had not only refused his choices, but done so with a clear, almost contemptuous disdain. Lord Alaric stepped forward, his expression grave. He had spent his life studying prophecies and ancient lore, but this moment defied all precedent. The sacred wolf was acting with an intelligence and purpose far beyond mere instinct, yet its actions were utterly inscrutable to human understanding. He looked at the king, then back at the majestic wolf, which now stood silent, its glowing eyes surveying the shocked faces of the court. The creature seemed to emanate an aura of ancient patience, as if waiting for these mortals to finally grasp the depth of its message. Eldoria, from her hiding place, felt a strange, cold dread slowly give way to a different, unsettling sensation. The wolf's rejection of the noble women, particularly Lady Isolde, had been so absolute, so unexpected. She had anticipated a grand, solemn selection, a confirmation of the king's political wisdom. Instead, the wolf had shattered every expectation, leaving a vacuum of confusion and profound bewilderment. Her heart still pounded, but the pure terror was now tinged with a bewildering curiosity. What was the wolf seeking, if not the finest of the nobility? The silence returned, heavy and oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of silk or the nervous cough of a guardsman. All eyes were still on the spirit wolf, waiting, hoping for some further sign, some clearer indication of its divine will. The wolf, however, seemed to have completed its assessment of the noble candidates. It stood for a long moment, its magnificent head held high, its powerful body radiating an almost palpable energy. The golden light from the windows caught the ethereal shimmer of its fur, making it seem less like a creature of flesh and blood, and more like a manifestation of pure spirit. Then, slowly, deliberately, the spirit wolf began to move again. It did not turn back to the line of noble women, nor did it acknowledge King Theron or Lord Alaric, who stood before the throne, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and growing apprehension. It simply began to walk. Its pace was unhurried, almost majestic, each step carrying an immense weight of unspoken purpose. It moved past the king, who watched with disbelieving eyes, past the bewildered nobles who parted before its silent advance like reeds in a gentle current. The wolf's gaze was fixed forward, its destination clear, though unfathomable to every soul present. Eldoria's breath hitched. A strange premonition, cold and sharp, pierced through her fear. The wolf was coming her way. It was heading directly towards the commoners' section, a section where she stood, unnoticed no longer. The wolf's presence loomed, growing larger with each silent, measured step. Eldoria's breath hitched. The grand hall around her blurred. All that remained was the luminous white fur, the unsettling intelligence in those glowing eyes. Its approach vibrated through the soles of her worn shoes, deep within her bones. Her fingers locked around the rough fabric of her skirt, digging into her palms until a dull ache began. She felt like a small bird caught in the gaze of a powerful creature. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to disappear back into the forgotten palace corners. Yet her feet remained rooted to the polished marble. A strange magnetic pull held her fast, defying the terror that threatened to unravel her. The air around her thickened, charged with an unseen energy. She tasted the metallic tang of fear, mixed with the faint, earthy scent of the wolf's pristine coat. It was the smell of ancient forests, of wild winds. The court's whispers died entirely, replaced by suffocating silence. Even the king's heavy breathing seemed to cease. Every eye in the vast chamber fixed upon her, upon the space between her and the approaching beast. Eldoria felt the heat of those countless gazes, a sudden unwanted spotlight piercing through years of shadow. Her cheeks flushed with a deeper humiliation than any she had ever known. She wished the floor would simply swallow her whole. Then the wolf was directly before her. It stopped, its massive head level with her chest. The intensity of its gaze was almost unbearable, a silent question she could not decipher. Its eyes, shimmering gold, seemed to see not just her, but every unspoken thought, every hidden wound, every quiet hope she harbored. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she swayed slightly. She thought she might faint, might finally escape this impossible moment. But the wolf remained, its presence a solid, unmoving wall of divine will. She felt the warmth radiating from its body, a comforting heat battling with the cold dread seizing her. A warm, wet sensation brushed against her trembling hand. It was the wolf's nose, cool and soft against her skin, an unexpected touch that startled her. A spark of recognition or profound tenderness passed between them. Her breath caught again, but this time not entirely from fear. A strange warmth spread from her fingertips, up her arm and into her chest. The wolf nudged her hand once more, a soft, deliberate pressure. It was not a demand, but an invitation, a familiar gesture that pierced through her terror. Her fingers instinctively curled, not around her skirt anymore, but around the soft fur of its muzzle. The world held its breath. The silence in the grand throne room was absolute, broken only by the frantic beat of Alara's own heart. She felt the vibrations of the wolf's deep, resonant purr, a rumble of contentment. It was a sound she had grown accustomed to in the solitude of the hidden healing garden, a secret comfort in her lonely days. But here, in this grand hall, surrounded by the judging eyes of the court, it felt utterly surreal. She looked down at her hand, still resting against the wolf's snout. The fur was incredibly soft, almost like spun moonlight. This was real. The quiet understanding felt like a stolen moment, too fragile for such a public stage. Then, with a grace that defied its immense size, the spirit wolf began to lower itself. Its powerful front legs bent, its body sinking slowly to the marble floor. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, tore through the court's silence. Hundreds of whispered exclamations rippled through the hall. The wolf's head, with its intelligent, glowing eyes, came to rest gently on its front paws, directly at Alara's feet. It had knelt. The sacred spirit wolf, the ancient guardian, knelt before her. Alara's own knees threatened to buckle. Her mind struggled to comprehend the sight. The creature embodying Eldoria's spirit, a divine legend, bowed to her. To Alara, the forgotten maidservant. A sob, silent and involuntary, escaped her throat. Her chest ached with awe and overwhelming humility. Her eyes, wet and shimmering with unshed tears, darted briefly to the faces of the court. Disbelief warred with outrage on Lady Isolda's features, her composure shattered. Her lips parted, only a silent snarl of fury emerging. Lord Alaric, usually so stoic, stood agape, confusion in his shrewd eyes. His hands hung limply at his sides. Then a soft, ethereal light emanated from Alara's inner wrist. It was a faint shimmer at first, barely perceptible, but it grew into a gentle glow that drew every eye. On her pale left wrist, where her pulse beat frantic, a mark began to form. It was a paw print, delicate and perfect, shimmering with the wolf's luminous white light. It pulsed softly, almost breathing, a living testament to an ancient bond. The spirit wolf's mark, visible to everyone, undeniable. The light spread faintly to her fingertips, making them appear almost translucent. Alara stared at the mark, her hand still resting lightly on the wolf's head. The glow traveled through her veins, a warmth spreading through her entire being, settling deep in her heart. It was a sensation unlike anything she had known, a feeling of belonging, of purpose, of being seen. Her deep-seated loneliness receded, replaced by a sudden, terrifying sense of connection. Her breath hitched again, a silent gasp caught between wonder and fear. This was happening now. The wolf's scent of pine and wild herbs now seemed to fill her own senses, a part of her. The sheer audacity of the moment hung heavy in the air. The wolf, still kneeling, raised its head slightly, its luminous eyes meeting Alara's. In that profound, silent communion, she understood. It was an acknowledgement, a consecration, a choice made by something far older and wiser than any king or noble. The court had sought a queen, a political alliance, a human solution to human problems. But the spirit wolf had offered something else entirely, a divine intervention defying all reason. The unspoken message resonated within Alara, a calling she had never anticipated and could not deny. From the assembled nobles, a collective murmur began to rise. It was a low, insistent hum like a hive of disturbed bees. Then individual voices broke through, sharp and disbelieving. "Impossible," someone whispered, cutting through the air. "A servant?" another voice hissed, dripping with contempt. Lady Isolde's face twisted with furious indignation. Her emerald eyes, usually calculating, blazed with fury. She stepped forward, as if to challenge the wolf's very act. But the wolf did not stir, its focus unwavering on Alara, its posture of reverence absolute. Alara felt the blood drain from her face, then rush back in a hot flush. The glowing mark on her wrist pulsed in rhythm with her racing heart. She heard the whispers, the incredulous gasps, the rising tide of outrage. It was like 1,000 tiny needles pricking her skin, each word a venomous dart. Years of being invisible had ill-prepared her for this blinding scrutiny. She wanted to shrink, to vanish into the rough fabric of her drab servant's dress. Yet, the wolf remained, its head bowed, a silent anchor in the court's storm. The weight of its choice settled upon her shoulders, heavy and undeniable. King Theron, unseated upon his grand throne, remained utterly motionless. His imposing figure, usually authoritative, froze in profound shock. His jaw clenched, his knuckles white where his hands gripped the throne. His wary blue eyes, accustomed to strife, stared ahead, unseeing. His vision fixed on the unbelievable scene unfolding below him. He saw the magnificent white wolf, the ancient spirit of his kingdom, kneeling before a mere maidservant. He saw the shimmering paw print mark on her wrist, glowing with undeniable ethereal light. The air around him crackled with unspoken tension, shaking his very foundations. His mind reeled, struggling to reconcile what he witnessed with all he knew, everything he had planned, everything he had been taught. The peace treaty, the fragile balance of power, the years of careful diplomacy, all seemed to shatter around him. The very foundation of his reign, built on duty and pragmatic necessity, now trembled beneath the weight of this divine act. He had prepared for a difficult choice between noble houses, for political maneuvering and strategic alliances. He had not prepared for a miracle or for chaos. A cold sweat pricked at his brow despite the hall's warmth. Lord Alaric, the king's trusted advisor, had recovered somewhat from his initial shock. He moved closer to the king's dais, pale, his usual sagacity replaced by bewildered concern. He glanced from the kneeling wolf to Alara, then to the king, his lips forming silent, unasked questions. The rigid order of the court, the carefully constructed hierarchy, had been utterly upended. The sacred had intruded upon the secular, divine will had defied human convention, and the consequences were unimaginable. His hand instinctively went to the hilt of his ceremonial dagger, a small gesture of unease. A cacophony of gasps, shouts, and frantic whispers now truly erupted throughout the grand throne room. It was a tempest of human reaction. Voices overlapped, indistinguishable in their sheer volume. Some cried out in disbelief, others in anger, a few in awe. Hands flew to mouths, eyes widened in horror or wonder. The court, usually composed, dissolved into a chaotic, buzzing hive of bewildered humanity. The air grew thick with speculation, fear, and a desperate search for explanation. The sound was deafening, a roar of human confusion. Alara stood in the center of it all, a silent, trembling figure amidst the storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing in her ears. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. Her head felt light, spinning with the enormity of the moment. The glowing mark on her wrist was a beacon, drawing all eyes, sealing her fate. A maelstrom of emotions swirled within her. Lingering terror, profound wonder, impossible responsibility, and a deep recognition of their bond. She looked at the kneeling wolf, its eyes still fixed on hers with ancient, unwavering wisdom. She looked at the faces of the court, a sea of confusion and indignation. She looked at King Theron, his face a mask of utter disbelief, a monarch stripped of his control, his authority challenged. Alara, the forgotten maidservant, was no longer invisible. She stood frozen, a figure of profound shock and reluctant wonder, at the heart of a kingdom transformed. The sound in the grand throne room was not a single roar, but 1,000 fractured cries, each one a shard of glass shattering against Alara's ears. A collective gasp had turned into a chaotic chorus of shouts and frantic whispers. The heavy air, thick moments ago with anticipation and expensive perfumes, now vibrated with naked fear and wild speculation. Alara's breath hitched in her throat, a small, painful knot forming behind her ribs. Her vision blurred at the edges, a dizzying swirl of noble faces, all turned towards her, their expressions ranging from utter disbelief to outright terror. The cold, unforgiving gaze of 100 pairs of eyes felt like physical blows. She could feel the chill of the polished stone floor seeping through her thin, worn shoes, a stark contrast to the burning heat that now emanated from her inner wrist. The faint, shimmering paw print pulsed, a beacon drawing every horrified stare. She wanted desperately to pull her hand away, to hide the mark, to make herself invisible as she had always done. Her fingers locked around the threadbare fabric of her apron, a futile anchor in a world that had just tilted wildly on its axis. Lord Alaric Thorne, usually a paragon of composure, stood frozen for a breath too long. His shrewd eyes darted from the magnificent white wolf, still kneeling before Alara, to the glowing mark on her wrist, and then to the king's ashen face. A deep furrow appeared between his brows, a silent testament to the unprecedented unraveling of his carefully orchestrated ceremony. He took a single, shaky step forward, his voice clearing with a strained cough that sliced through the rising din. "Silence!" Lord Alaric's voice, usually a resonant boom, cracked slightly under the immense pressure. He tried again, louder this time, commanding the court to regain its composure. "Silence, I say! Control yourselves!" But the court was beyond control. Whispers of sorcery and dark omens spread like wildfire carried on agitated breaths. One noblewoman fainted with a soft thud, her elaborate headdress clattering against the marble. A guard's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, his eyes wide with superstitious dread. The ancient, revered spirit wolf, the very symbol of their kingdom's divine favor, had chosen a scullery maid, rejecting all royal blood. The sheer impossibility of it was a seismic shock to the very foundations of their world. Alara felt her knees tremble, a profound, gut-wrenching shame washing over her. This was worse than any public humiliation she had ever endured. This was not merely scorn. This was an accusation, a public desecration of something sacred. The wolf, her quiet confidant, her secret solace, had made her the most visible person in the kingdom, and it felt like a cruel betrayal. She could feel a strange, wild scent from the wolf, an earthy musk mingled with something like ozone, now mixing with the cloying perfumes of the court and the sharp, metallic tang of her own fear. Then, a voice, sharp and venomous, pierced through the clamor. Like an ice shard, Lady Isolde Blackwell, her face a mask of incandescent fury, stepped forward from the line of discarded noble candidates. Her raven hair, so meticulously braided, seemed to bristle around her head. Her green eyes, usually so calculating and composed, now blazed with raw, unrestrained hatred. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Alara, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo. "Witchcraft!" Isolde shrieked, her accusation echoing off the high arches of the throne room. "This is nothing but a vile trick, a deception orchestrated by this common servant. She has bewitched the sacred wolf." A fresh wave of gasps erupted, now mingled with murmurs of agreement from some of the more superstitious nobles. The word witchcraft hung heavy in the air, a death sentence whispered in the heart of the palace. Alara flinched, her entire body recoiling as if struck. The accusations were a familiar sting, but never had they held such terrifying weight. She had always been blamed for things, for being clumsy, for being quiet, for simply existing in the shadows. But this was different. This was an accusation that threatened to consume her entirely. "Arrest her!" Isolde continued, her voice gaining strength, fueled by her outrage and the public rejection she had just suffered. "Seize this sorceress at once. She dares to corrupt our sacred ceremony, to mock the king, to threaten the very peace of our realm." Lord Alaric, now pale but resolute, stepped between Isolde and Alara, attempting to create a barrier with his presence. "Lady Isolde, I understand your distress," he said, his voice firm despite the underlying tremor. But we must not make hasty judgments. This is an unprecedented event. Precedent be damned, Isolde spat, her eyes still locked on Alara, who stood like a statue of fear. The wolf rejected me, us, the true noble blood. And then it bows to her? She laughed, a bitter, hysterical sound that sent shivers down Alara's spine. A filthy maidservant. It is an insult, a curse, a sign of her dark magic. The accusations hammered at Alara, each word a blow. She felt a profound wave of nausea. Her stomach twisted into knots, and her throat felt parched, rough as sandpaper. The metallic taste of fear was overwhelming now. She knew she should speak, should explain, should defend herself against these monstrous lies. But the words were stuck, trapped behind a barrier of terror and a lifetime of being unheard. Her voice had always been a whisper, easily drowned out, easily ignored. Now, in this deafening storm, it seemed utterly lost. She tried to form a syllable, a single sound, but only a dry, rasping breath escaped her lips. Her eyes, wide and pleading, met the furious green gaze of Lady Isolde, who saw only guilt in her silence. The spirit wolf, however, still knelt patiently before her, its head resting gently on her lap, a silent, comforting weight. Its eyes, glowing with that otherworldly light, seemed to pierce through the chaos, looking directly into Alara's soul, offering a silent, profound understanding. The warmth radiating from the wolf's fur was the only real sensation keeping her grounded. She could feel its steady breathing, a deep, rhythmic pulse against her trembling leg. She wished she could melt into that warmth, disappear into its soft white fur, escape the burning eyes of the court. The sudden, overwhelming attention felt like a physical burden, crushing her spirit. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, to fade into the background, to avoid notice. Now, every single person in the grandest hall of the kingdom stared at her, judging her, condemning her. King Theron, who had remained silent through Isolde's outburst, now slowly descended from his throne. Each step was deliberate, heavy, echoing in the momentary lull that followed Isolde's tirade. His royal blue robes, usually a symbol of his unwavering authority, seemed to sag under the weight of the moment. His face, once etched with sheer disbelief, had settled into an expression of profound bewilderment, mixed with a chilling determination. He walked past the stunned nobles, past a still shaking Isolde, until he stood mere feet from Alara and the kneeling spirit wolf. His eyes, deep-set and weary, were fixed on Alara. They were no longer filled with the political calculations of a king, but with the raw, questioning confusion of a man whose entire world order had just been upended. He saw the genuine terror in her hazel eyes, the trembling of her small frame, the shining mark on her wrist. He saw the ancient wolf, revered for centuries, humbled before this insignificant girl. The logic of his kingdom, the necessity of the treaty, the very meaning of his rule, all now lay shattered before him. He raised a hand, not in anger, but in a gesture that commanded absolute silence. The court, mesmerized by the unfolding drama, finally hushed. The only sound was the faint rustle of the banners overhead and Alara's own ragged breathing. "What?" King Theron's voice was low, yet it resonated through the vast chamber, holding an undeniable power. "Is the meaning of this?" His gaze intensified, searching Alara's face, probing the depths of her fear and confusion. He was a king who relied on reason, on diplomacy, on the ancient laws of his land. But now he faced something entirely beyond his understanding, something divine and utterly disruptive. He looked at the wolf, then back at Alara, an unspoken question hanging between them, thick with the weight of destiny and duty. He needed answers, and he needed them now, unsure whether to trust his own eyes or the sacred duty that defined his reign. The king's breath hitched, a cold knot tightening as the court's murmurs swelled. His gaze found Alara, a girl he barely knew, now glowing. The crown felt heavy. He saw the shimmering mark on her wrist. Duty screamed one thing, but the ancient spirit wolf, kneeling before a servant, defied all reason. King Theron rose, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. Words were lost in shock and fear. His eyes, usually resolute, held bewilderment. He turned from the nobles and Lady Isolde, walking away. Each step felt like wading through cold water. Court sounds faded, replaced by questions in his mind. He passed through grand double doors, severing him from chaos. Palace corridors felt like a labyrinth. The court's cloying scent clung, a reminder of shattered order. Past tapestries and portraits, ancestors seemed to question Eldoria's foundations. He touched a cold stone pillar, but a chill seeped into his bones. Unseen servants' clatter emphasized his solitude. He reached his private chambers, a space for contemplation. The room was warm with cedar, yet offered no solace. He moved to his oak desk, the royal treaty scroll spread, detailing a now fragile future. He sat heavily. The fire crackled, but its warmth could not penetrate the ice around his heart. How could he proceed with the treaty when Eldoria's spirits had spoken? The kingdom's peace hung by a thread, tangled with divine will. His thoughts raced: duty, prophecy, disbelief. He was King Theron, pragmatic ruler, not swayed by a wolf. Yet the wolf was real. Its presence, its choice, the mark, undeniable. He closed his eyes, picturing Alara's terrified face. She, invisible until now, was everything. He breathed deeply, trying to calm his heart. Fear lingered. He needed counsel from someone understanding ancient ways. Lord Alaric. Theron tugged the bell cord. A guard appeared. "Send Lord Alaric to me at once," Theron commanded, his voice tight. "Bring the ancient text concerning the spirit wolf and the chosen." Lord Alaric arrived swiftly, his calm demeanor ruffled. A man of tradition, awe flickered in his shrewd eyes. He carried ancient leather-bound books, their scent filling the room. He bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," Alaric began, "the palace is in an uproar. The spirit wolf has never acted with such intent." Theron gestured for him to sit. Intent indeed, it shattered every plan. How can a creature overturn our diplomatic efforts? The peace we desperately need? Alaric adjusted his spectacles. The spirit wolf embodies Eldoria's ancient spirits. Its actions are pronouncements, divine will. He met the king's gaze. The kneeling, the mark. These are signs of the chosen, whispered in legends, unseen for centuries. Theron scoffed. "The chosen, a scullery maid? Alaric, our kingdom faces war without this alliance. Viridia will see this as an insult. My rule is questioned by a beast and a servant girl." Frustration burned. "With respect," Alaric said, "its choice is profound precisely because of her. A servant, overlooked. To ignore it invites disaster greater than any conflict with Viridia." Theron slammed his fist on the desk. "Disaster? What greater disaster than fractured alliances? Bloodshed. My duty is to protect Eldoria, not interpret fables." "And my duty," Alaric countered, "is to remind you Eldoria's strength comes from its spirit's blessing. The wolf's choice is undeniable. To defy it risks losing your people's faith, inviting strife, even divine wrath." He pushed a book. "Legends speak of kings who defied the chosen. The land withered, people suffered, the crown lost its light." Theron picked up the book. His eyes saw Alara's frightened face. The mark burned into his mind. He looked at Alaric. "What do you suggest? Marry this girl? Declare a servant queen? Shattering diplomatic work? Inviting ridicule?" Alaric sighed. "Caution. We must understand this fully. Speak with the girl. She has a bond with a wolf. She must have answers." Theron's gaze hardened, but curiosity mixed with dread pricked him. Alaric spoke sense. This was a spiritual earthquake. He had to understand. "Summon her," Theron commanded, his voice a low growl. "Bring Alara Vance to me. Alone." Meanwhile, Alara stood still in the servants' quarters, the court's roar ringing. Her heart pounded. Her hands were clasped, trembling. The king's disbelief remained etched. She still felt the wolf's phantom warmth. Her mind replayed the scene, the wolf's entrance, its walk, the kneeling, the mark. She glanced at her wrist, the faint shimmer pulsing gently. Panic was a cold, creeping fog. Accusations of witchcraft, Lady Isolde's venom, swirled. She was a maidservant, now the center of a terrifying spectacle. What would happen? Imprisonment? Nausea washed over her. The dormitory door creaked open. A grim-faced guard stood framed, his eyes holding fear and curiosity. "Alara Vance," he announced, "the king requests your presence. Immediately." Her blood ran cold. The summons had come. She swallowed, throat dry with fear. Her legs felt like lead. yet she had no choice. She walked past other servants, their faces a mix of fear, wonder, resentment. Whispers followed her. The walk felt endless. Every stone seemed to judge. The air was thick with tension. She smelled beeswax and damp stone, now unsettling. Guards stared, bewildered. She kept her eyes on the flagstones. She felt utterly alone, isolated. The spirit wolf, her confidant, had thrust her into the king's terrifying spotlight. A pang of longing for the hidden healing garden, for wild roses and the wolf's comfort, struck her. That sanctuary was shattered. The guard stopped before a heavy carved door with the royal crest, the king's private chambers. Her heart hammered, a plea for escape. Blood pounded. The guard knocked, then pushed the door open. "Alara Vance, your majesty," he announced. He stepped aside. She took a shaky breath, air cold and metallic, and stepped into the vast room. Tapestries filled it, smelling of cedar. Lord Alaric sat at a table, ancient books before him, his wise eyes unreadable. Then she saw the king. He stood by the hearth, his regal form outlined by flames. King Theron, once distant, now seemed burdened. He turned slowly, his deep blue eyes, usually commanding, held profound weariness, raw vulnerability. He said nothing, studying her. His gaze felt like a physical weight. Tears pricked Alara's eyes, a wave of sadness. She stood, a simple maid, trembling, exposed. "Alara Vance," King Theron spoke, his voice deep, tinged with a confusion. "Tell me of your connection to the spirit wolf." His words were direct, immense. Alara swallowed. She saw worry lines around his eyes, a man grappling with the unknown. Fragile honesty welled within her. "Your Majesty," she whispered, I I found him. He was hurt." She spoke simply, recounting the injured wolf in the hidden healing garden, her secret visits, the salves, the food. She described its pain, its gentle nudges, how it understood her loneliness. She spoke of their profound, silent bond, a solace she had never known. Her words were earnest, raw. She told her truth, her trembling hands reaching for her wrist, where the faint mark still pulsed. King Theron listened, eyes on her face. He saw her genuine honesty, her voice trembling with fear and compassion. He saw unshed tears, reflecting a rare depth of feeling. He looked at her slender frame, worn dress, mouse-brown hair, and tried to reconcile this with the kneeling entity. He walked towards her, his gaze falling to her wrist. "Show me the mark," he commanded, his voice soft. Slowly, Alara pulled her hand away. The faint, shimmering paw print appeared, glowing softly for him alone to see. It was unmistakable, vibrant, a living testament to ancient power. He reached out, his finger hovering above her skin, not quite touching, but close enough for her to feel his presence. His hand's slight tremor. He felt a jolt, a profound vibration, a silent confirmation. The king looked from the mark to Alara's eyes, brimming with raw emotion. He saw her fear, confusion, and a quiet strength. His duty crashed anew. It was no longer political, it was a spiritual test. He realized with chilling certainty the divine challenge to his rule, leaving him in profound internal conflict. A heavy silence draped itself over the king's private chambers, thicker than the velvet curtains at the windows. King Theron's gaze remained fixed on the faint, shimmering paw print on Alara's inner wrist, a mark that pulsed with an otherworldly light. He saw not merely a symbol, but the raw, unyielding truth of a divine declaration. Alara felt the tremor in her own hand, a stark contrast to the burgeoning strength that now seemed to rise from deep within her. It was a surprising, unwelcome sensation, yet it held her upright. She had always sought invisibility, a quiet corner in the sprawling, indifferent palace. Now the weight of every noble's gaze, the king's penetrating stare, felt like a physical burden. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but it was no longer solely the drum of fear. A quiet defiance sparked in her hazel eyes. She remembered the wolf's pain, the delicate bone beneath her fingers, the shivering breath against her palm in the hidden garden. No one else had seen its vulnerability, its need. No one else had knelt in the damp earth, whispering reassurances to a creature so majestic, yet so broken. That intimacy, that raw connection, felt like a sacred trust she could not betray, even under the king's questioning. Your Majesty, Ilara's voice emerged, surprisingly clear despite its softness, no longer the trembling whisper of yesterday. The sound startled even herself, a new timbre she had not known she possessed. I did not seek this, I only sought to help. Her fingers instinctively brushed over the spirit wolf's mark, its warmth a tangible reassurance. She looked up, meeting King Theron's eyes directly for the first time. There was no anger in his gaze, only a profound, searching intensity that made her own breath catch. The wolf was hurt, she continued, a flood of memories washing over her. It was bleeding, hiding in the neglected garden. I could not leave it to suffer. No one else seemed to notice. The words were simple, unadorned by courtly grace or clever rhetoric. They were merely truth, spoken from a place of deep, unselfish empathy. She recalled the fear in the wolf's eyes, the way it flinched from the unseen dangers, the quiet trust it slowly placed in her hands. King Theron watched her, his expression unreadable, but a muscle in his jaw twitched subtly. He had heard countless pleas, countless calculated arguments, in his years on the throne. Never had he heard such unvarnished honesty, such a stark absence of personal ambition. Her eyes, usually downcast, now held a steady, unwavering light that seemed to pierce through his own weariness. He wondered if this was the pure heart the ancient spirits valued, unburdened by the complexities of power. I brought it water, then herbs for its wounds, Ilara explained, her voice gaining a quiet momentum as she spoke of the secret days in the garden. It was afraid, but it was also regal, even in its pain. I simply tried to ease its suffering. It felt wrong to ignore it. She spoke of the damp earth, the scent of crushed mint leaves, the almost human sigh the wolf sometimes made. These details painted a vivid picture for the king, a world away from the gilded cages of the throne room. A tremor passed through King Theron, a sensation he rarely allowed himself to feel. He had always seen the world in terms of alliances, treaties, and the cold calculations of power. Yet this simple maidservant, with her quiet devotion to a suffering creature, had somehow bypassed all his defenses. He saw the genuine raw emotion in Ilara's eyes, the unfeigned pain she still carried from the wolf's initial injury. It was an innocence he had believed long lost in the corridors of his palace. "And you believe this was the spirit wolf?" King Theron asked, his voice low, almost a murmur, betraying a hint of his own vulnerability. He felt the weight of his crown, usually a source of authority, now pressing down with questions he had no answers for. This was not the political game he knew. This was something ancient, something beyond his control. Ilara nodded slowly, her gaze still unwavering. "I did not know for certain at first, Your Majesty, but its eyes, they held an ancient wisdom. And when it was well, it disappeared as silently as it came." She paused, her thoughts drifting to the grand hall, the quay, and the wolf's sudden, undeniable presence. Then it returned, in the throne room, and it chose mi penso. A tear, unbidden, traced a path down her cheek, a mix of fear and a strange, profound acceptance. It was not a tear of weakness, but of a soul grappling with a destiny it never sought. King Theron saw the tear, glistening in the soft chamber light, and felt a pang in his chest. He had seen many tears in his life, tears of grief, of anger, of manipulation. But Ilara's tear held the quiet dignity of a woman confronting the unimaginable. He considered the intricate network of alliances he had built, the precarious peace he maintained. All of it now seemed fragile, almost irrelevant, in the face of the spirit wolf's unmistakable will. "I only wish for peace, Your Majesty," Ilara whispered, her voice laced with a raw, earnest longing. "For the kingdom, for the people." She spoke not of treaties or borders, but of quiet lives, of families safe from conflict, of the simple joy of a peaceful morning. She had seen firsthand the fear in the servants' quarters when news of border skirmishes arrived, the hushed anxieties, the quiet despair. Her vision of peace was deeply personal, forged in the crucible of everyday suffering, not in the distant halls of diplomacy. This was what truly resonated with the king. Her words were a stark mirror to his own deepest, most private wish. He had sought peace through duty, through sacrifice, through the very marriage that now seemed impossible. Yet his peace felt cold, a political necessity. Hers was warm, born of compassion, a heartfelt yearning for true tranquility. The sheer humility of her desire, so utterly devoid of self-interest, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He saw the long, arduous path he had been on, a path paved with compromises and heavy choices. He had believed it was the only way, the pragmatic way, to secure Eldoria's future. But now, Alara's quiet strength, her unshakable empathy, coupled with the undeniable divine sign, began to chip away at his rigid worldview. He started to perceive a different path, one that integrated duty with a deeper spiritual understanding of leadership. Perhaps peace was not merely a matter of strategy, but of spirit. His eyes met hers again, and in that shared glance, a silent acknowledgement passed between them. It was a moment of profound, unspoken understanding. The heavy burden of the kingdom's fate, once solely his, now seemed to settle upon them both. It was not a partnership of equals in title, but of two souls grappling with a destiny thrust upon them by an ancient, inscrutable will. He, the king by birthright, and she, the chosen by divine grace. The paradox was immense yet undeniable. A wave of exhaustion washed over King Theron, but it was different from the weary fatigue he usually carried. This was the exhaustion of a mind grappling with a profound paradigm shift, of a heart opening to possibilities it had long since dismissed. He looked away from Alara, his gaze sweeping across the heavy oak table, the scattered parchments, the untouched goblet of wine. The symbols of his power now felt distant, almost hollow. He cleared his throat, the sound a low rumble in the quiet room. Alara's gaze, still fixed on him, seemed to anticipate his next words. He rose from his chair, his movements deliberate, his regal bearing returning with a renewed, though altered, sense of purpose. The internal conflict was not gone, but something new had settled within him, a quiet resolve hardening his features. He knew now that he could not simply dismiss this, could not simply force the old ways upon a destiny so clearly proclaimed. "The spirit wolf has spoken," King Theron declared, his voice resonating with a new, quiet authority that transcended mere kingship. It was an authority born not of crown, but of profound recognition. The path forward is no longer clear, but it is also no longer solely mine to forge. He walked to the window, gazing out at the darkening palace grounds, the ancient stones silent witnesses to the turmoil within. He turned back to Alara, his gaze now firm, stripped of lingering doubt. "I will consult the ancient texts. I will speak with the kingdom's spiritual elders. We will seek guidance from those who understand the ancient ways, the whispers of the land." His voice was measured, but beneath it lay a newfound conviction. This was a king making a profound shift, acknowledging a power greater than his own throne. He knew the court would balk, the nobles would rage, and the treaty would hang in the balance. But for the first time in many years, King Theron felt a sense of rightness in his decision. The path forward remained fraught with uncertainty, a twisting road through uncharted territory, but he would not walk it alone. Silence filled the grand throne room as King Theron stepped forward. Alara stood beside him, her heart beating fast, her breath tight. The marble floor hummed beneath her worn shoes. 100 courtier eyes watched them, searching her simple presence. The tapestries seemed to frame an unexpected moment. Theron's voice resonated, losing its formality. "Noble lords, esteemed ladies, people of Eldoria," he began, his gaze sweeping stunned faces. "We stand at a precipice of change." He paused, his blue eyes finding Alara for a moment. A subtle warmth passed between them. "For generations, our kingdom sought guidance from the ancient spirits, from our sacred wolf." He gestured to the throne, then where the wolf had knelt. Never was that guidance so clear as it was on that day. Alara's fingers brushed the mark on her wrist, a secret comfort. Courtiers shifted, their whispers a low hum, the scent of wood and stone mixed with fear. She had lived in shadows, and now scrutiny felt like a weight. Yet a quiet resolve from solitary hours with the wolf held her steady. She was more than a maidservant. "The spirit wolf," Theron continued, "rejected political expediency. It chose a path of profound truth, revealing deeper wisdom." He turned to Alara, indicating her with his hand. not possession, but acknowledgement. It chose Alara, not a queen for a treaty, but its chosen, a spiritual guide for Eldoria's ancient will. Tension filled the air, a mix of disbelief, anger, and awe. Alara's cheeks flushed, but she met the king's gaze. A silent promise passed between them. Her inner voice, once timid, gained clarity. This is not about me. It is about Eldoria, about the wolf. The spirit wolf's counsel felt present, grounding her. The kingdom's weight, once crushing, now felt like a sacred trust. Lady Isolde Blackwell stood rigid, her face a mask of fury. Her elaborate gown seemed to mock Alara's simple presence. She had dreamed of this power. To see it lost to a servant was an unbearable insult. Her sharp green eyes darted from Theron to Alara, then to her allies, seeking rebellion. She found only strained smiles. Theron addressed the treaty, his voice firm. Eldoria's peace remains paramount. The Viridia Treaty is vital. He let murmurs subside. However, the spirit wolf showed true peace cannot be forged through political marriages alone. His words challenged generations of diplomacy. It must root in deeper understanding, harmony beyond borders and bloodlines. He outlined a new radical strategy, not rejecting the treaty, but reinterpreting it. We will send envoys to Viridia, he declared, not for marriage, but with an offer of cultural exchange, of shared spiritual understanding. He spoke of building empathy, fostering peace through mutual respect for traditions and divine guidance. Alara listened, sensing the delicate balance this path required. Sadness for past suffering mixed with burgeoning hope. Unease spread through the assembly. Lord Alaric Thorne, a staunch traditionalist, stood beside the king, grave but resolute. He had studied ancient texts with Theron, heard Alara's simple accounts with the wolf. He had seen the mark, felt her power. His rigid pragmatism bent to divine will. This new path held peril, but the old one was shattered. Lady Isolde's sharp voice cut the quiet. What does a common maid know of diplomacy, your majesty? What counsel but childish tales? Her words, a desperate attempt to undermine Alara, hung in the air. Some nobles nodded, sharing Isolde's contempt. Her expensive perfume turned bitter in Alara's nostrils. Theron turned to Isolde, his gaze unwavering. Lady Isolde, he said quietly, his authority clear, Alara communed with this land's ancient spirit. She carries its mark. Her wisdom is not of treaties, but of Eldoria's heart. He paused. Her counsel will guide us to a peace more enduring than any forced alliance. His tone allowed no debate. The decision was sealed by a power none dared defy. Alara felt the resentment from nobles. Their acceptance was grudging, born of fear. Yet she saw curiosity, hope, in younger courtiers and common folk. Her journey would be hard, facing doubt and resistance. But she was not alone. Theron's trust, the spirit wolf's blessing, and a burgeoning purpose filled her long-held ache. Months later, the palace transformed. Cold formality yielded to a shared, sacred warmth. Alara, free from menial tasks, consulted with Theron, Lord Alaric, and elders. Her voice grew stronger daily. She spoke of compassion, listening to the land, finding strength in unity. Her simple wisdom, once dismissed, now held weight. The king and Alara formed an unspoken, deep bond, forged in divine intervention and shared duty. Their glances met across council tables, acknowledging their unprecedented path. He saw a leader, a guide whose quiet strength lit a new way. She saw a man burdened by duty, now embracing a greater destiny. Their hands, though rarely touching, hovered near, a silent testimony to their understanding and respect. Eldoria's people, initially bewildered, embraced Alara. Her quiet presence, kindness, and dedication resonated. They saw a beacon of hope, a link to ancient spirits. The spirit wolf often roamed the grounds, a silent, majestic guardian. Its glowing eyes reminded them of divine will. Its rare howls carried resonant peace. Political plans, once rigid, reshaped by divine will, bent to a future of compassion. Envoys returned from Viridia, not with a reluctant bride, but foundations for a lasting alliance. It was built on shared spiritual values and harmony. Ancient scrolls, once documents, now represented a living covenant between two peoples, guided by something older than ambition. Cold diplomacy yielded to empathy. The sun dipped, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Eldoria stood, her cloak wrapped, watching daylight fade. King Theron joined her, his presence comforting. Together they surveyed the kingdom, a landscape feeling like a cherished trust. The spirit wolf watched from ancient oaks, its white fur shimmering in twilight, a vigilant guardian. A warmth, born of profound purpose, spread through the once cold palace. It was a new dawn for Eldoria, guided by human leadership and divine wisdom.